Okay, so let's talk about creating a brush preset for a custom brush, right? And then we will create a generic brush, a plain vanilla brush, right? It'll be just a circle with everything set to default. And then from that, we will duplicate it and create a thick and thin brush. Okay, so if I create a shape, for example, if I use the brush tool, now if I create, for example, an icon, right? I'm going to create this guy right here. So let's say that I want to make a brush out of this shape right here. In order to make a brush, right, think of the brush made out of three components: the tip shape, a set of attributes, and a specific color. In order to create a tip shape for our brush, we have to select this design right here, and then under Edit, we are going to go to Define Brush Preset. And here we can name our brush preset. I'm just going to leave it the way it is. And I'm going to hit OK. And now when I go to my brush palette, and I select B for brush, so that all my attributes and tip shapes get activated, you will notice that our newly created tip shape is right here. Okay, if I set up the spacing to, for example, 400, you can see the shape here, right? Now you can see that we can paint using this brush tip shape. All right, so if I create a spacing of 1, what we get, it's a very smooth, happy face brush. All right, so think of the brush tip shapes as the stamp. So if you have a really big spacing, this would be the stamp that your brush uses. And as you make your spacing smaller, it turns into a brush because you're stamping really fast at a spacing of 1% as you draw on your canvas. So once we assign specific attributes right here and right here, our brush will create very interesting shapes. So for example, I can select something like leaves, this one right here. I can increase my spacing, and I will go to scattering, and I'm going to scatter on both the X and the Y. I'm going to increase my scattering. I'm going to go to my shape dynamics and take advantage of my Wacom pen and the pen pressure. So I can go from really small, as you can see in the preview, to big. And I'm going to give it an angle jitter so that my brush rotates slightly in different directions. Alright, and then I'm going to go to flip X so that the brush tip shape will be flipped every so often. Okay. And now when I draw with this specific foliage brush, you can see that we can create really interesting brushes. Now by adding these attributes right here and the ones from the tip shape, and then assigning a specific opacity and mode along with a color, we can create what is called a tool preset. So the very basic concept of a tool preset is that a tool preset is a brush with a set of attributes, a specific opacity, flow, and mode, and with a specific color. So every time I go to that one specific tool preset, everything that I've selected, the attributes, the opacity, and the colors, will revert to what they were once I created this brush. So for example, if I select a green color for my leaf, and I'm gonna select another color for the background. Alright, so as you can see, I have two different colors right here. And if I go to color dynamics, and I have a foreground and background jitter, meaning that it's going to go between the foreground and the background color, as you can see right here. Notice how my brush switches between the foreground color and the background color, and because I have shape dynamics, it will make it thick and thin, right, depending on how much pressure I give my brush. And I can also add things such as wet edges. So it creates kind of like a wet edge effect on my brush. Right? Let's say that I have that and I am going to decrease my opacity by 66%. Let me clear the canvas. And this is what it looks like with a opacity of 66%. So let's say that I want to save this tool preset. What I would do, I would go to my tool presets palette. And as you can see, I have quite a few of them. And I'm going to go to the very bottom and I can click on create new tool preset, or I can go to the tool presets palette options and go to new tool presets. It's the same thing. When I go there, it's going to ask me to name this. So I'm going to call this one 000 space dash, so it goes all the way to the top of my list. Leaves brush 001, and I'm going to include the color. Alright, and as you can see, it went to the top of my tool presets. So let's say, for example, I switch the colors to black and white. I go to my palettes window and I deselect everything. I go to my brush tip shape and I select a very boring circle 31, and I increase my opacity to 100%, right? So everything has been reset. As you can see, when I draw this brush, I get this very boring round brush. However, when I go to my tool presets and I select my leaves brush 01, look what happens to all my settings. If I go to my brushes, you will notice that all my attributes have been reselected and they are the same as when I picked them and modified them. My opacity went back to 66%, and my foreground and background colors were switched to the colors that I picked when I created the tool preset. So now when I draw with this brush, I get the same effects that I had when I first created it. And that is because this is a tool preset, not a brush. Now we're going to create a generic brush, what I call a vanilla brush, because sometimes when we have all these attributes and all these bells and whistles selected, we want to go back to a generic round brush so we can start from scratch. Alright, so I'm going to deselect all my attributes. I'm going to go to my opacity and increase it by 100%. Make sure that the mode is set to normal. I'm going to go to my default black and white foreground and background. And for my brush tip shape, I am going to select a plain and boring circle. I am going to make my opacity be 1%. And for my size, I'm going to go to somewhere like a 50. So as you can see, I have a plain and boring brush. I'm going to go to my tool presets. And I'm going to go this time to the very bottom. And I'm going to click on create new tool preset. I want the color included, and I'm going to call this one 000 space dash default brush. So I want to hit OK. Anytime I select another brush, right, like this one right here, or this one right here, or this one right here, or this one, I can always go to my default brush. Let me clear the canvas, and there we go. From this plain and boring brush, I can quickly create a thick and thin brush that I can use for inking. Let me close the tool preset and open the brush presets. And all I have to do is click on Shape Dynamics, make sure that I have pen pressure selected. And now you can see that I can quickly create a great inking brush. And this is how we create a generic brush tool preset and a thick and thin tool preset for our paint brushes.